Hi, I'm Chris with Core Body Temp. Ever thought about how your temperature goes up and how it might affect your performance and how you can gain, again, a performance advantage of that? If you want to find out, come listen to us on the Physical Performance Show. You'll learn a little bit more about this topic.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go.
Welcome to episode 320 of the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Polar, the world's top choice in personal guidance for fitness, sports, and health. Polar are very excited to announce that they are launching two stunning new generation running watches, the Polar Pacer and the Polar Pacer Pro. I'm Brad Beer, sports and exercise physiotherapist by trade and training and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week, as you know, we'll bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration designed to help you perform at your physical best. We do this across a range of our different episodes, featured performers, interest editions, coaches' corners, learnings catch-up episodes, and of course our very popular expert editions. And during today's expert edition, you'll enjoy learnings from Chris Blumfield-Brown, the performance and technology lead over at a very innovative technology company, Core Body Temperature. Core Body Temperature are manufacturing, as the name suggests, devices to help athletes of all levels measure their core body temperature and through thermoregulation science achieve their physical best. Now, you may have seen these devices, the little white ones, being stuck onto heart rate monitor straps and even clothing from some of the best endurance athletes on the planet, such as Kristian Blummenfelt, Norwegian reigning Olympic champion and Ironman world record holder, and his Norwegian counterpart and former guest of the show, Gustav Iden, dual 70.3 Ironman world champion. These devices made by Core Body Temperature are being used extensively within the ranks of the world cycling peloton. And as you'll hear Chris outline today, many athletes and teams and federations leading into Tokyo 2020 were using the devices to assist the athletes with their heat acclimation strategies. Now, this conversation covers physiology and the role of thermoregulation within sports, how we can monitor our core body temperature and why it matters, the relationship between warming up and losing power and decrementing performance, and the concept of thermal load and how we can all apply it to our training to optimize outcomes. So get ready with your pen and paper. Here is my conversation with Chris Blumfield-Brown, Performance and Technology Lead over at Core Body Temperature Thermoregulation in Sports. Chris Blumfield-Brown, Core Body Temperature Performance and Tech and Product Lead. Welcome to the Physical Performance Show.
All right. Thanks for having us, Brad.
I've been very much looking forwards to capturing some discussion around this topic of core body temperature measurement and thermoregulation since the core body temperature device ended up in my lap circa 18 months ago. And I've had my measurement time with it and have explored it quite a bit. It's got so much to add to the world of sport and endurance pursuits and the wider body of physiology. But can you put us in the driver's seat of the evolution of this technology and then I guess how you got involved, Chris, in your role?
As you said, I'm the product manager for Core. I've been with the company for a few years, and I mostly deal on the sports side. We have a medical side also. So it's Core is a wearable device. It's you just clip it onto your heart rate monitor is how most people wear it, and it monitors your core body temperature. So, and core body temperature is relevant in sports, and there's been a lot of research, but it's been too hard or not accessible for outside researchers or very high level people. So we've got a technology now that makes this much more accessible to the average athlete.
So it's a wearable device. The obvious question is, why does monitoring core body temperature matter? In other words, what are the benefits?
Yeah, great question. And maybe we should first start with explaining what happens. So when you're doing exercise, when you're doing physical exercise, everyone, you're getting warm. You start sweating, and what happens is your core body temperature is going up, and it goes up as a function of effort. And the first thing that most people don't understand is how hot you get. When you do an exercise, your core body temperature rises to high to extreme fever levels. The highest temperature we've seen recorded is about 41.5 degrees, and most people would be in a hospital by then. But we see athletes regularly around 40 degrees, 39.5 degrees. That's fairly common. And the next important part to know is as your core body temperature increases, your functional threshold level, your FTP value, if you want, decreases. It's directly related to performance. And I believe that's why a lot of the top level teams and athletes and coaches know this. And that's why we've had such quick acceptance rate in the pro peloton and the Olympic teams last year in Tokyo. So there's a really good performance gains that you can get out of this information. And it's an important piece in the puzzle. It's one more piece in the puzzle, but it's an important piece of the puzzle.
Everyone listening in just sharpened up their ears with that, Chris. Performance gains, that's it, the aim of the game and the one of the aims of this show, the Physical Performance Show. But it's interesting, just looping back there, you mentioned just how hot we can get, the highest temperature you've seen there, 41.5 degrees. Fever is generally accepted to be greater than 38 degrees. So in other words, athletes are working in feverish levels.
Yeah. Spin class, even if you're doing a 45-minute spin class, you're above 38. The majority of the people would be above 38 degrees. Yeah. So above fever level. And it's amazing how much your performance drops with about a 1.4 degree drop in most people. You can drop, your threshold power can drop around roughly 20%. We have a test to show that. But with training, you can have less drop. So everyone drops, you can just drop it less. Maybe I should explain why that happens, is how your thermal regulation system works. So basically, when you get hot, your body diverts blood to the skin for cooling. So what happens is blood gets closer to the skin. The plasma comes out of your blood, is in sweat. You sweat, and that evaporation process cools the skin. So as that blood circulates close to the skin, it cools the blood, and then it circulates it around the rest of the body for cooling. It's basically almost think of it as a mechanical system. So you just divert blood to the skin, you cool off the skin, it cools the blood and circulate it around the body to cool things off. When you do that, you're diverting blood. So you're diverting blood from the working muscles to the skin. X steals from Y. But the simple version to think about why that happens and why your threshold level drops. And the other thing to think about is a lot of times when you compete, if you're doing a triathlon or an endurance event, a marathon, your temperature is elevated. So your body's in a different type of stress. But when we train, as we said, in these high fever levels, 39.5 degrees, very common. But when we train, a lot of times we're training at a lower level. So like all the training is to put your body in stress so your body adapts. And so it performs better in that. So we should train with temperature in mind at times to be able to get that proper adaptation. We can expand on that a little bit too. So basically, you train, you raise hot, but a lot of times we're training cold. But to get the proper adaptation, you need to actually put your body in a similar stress that you're going to do in a competition. And so just think of thermoregulations as another stress system that we need to optimize for performance.
That's powerful. Thermoregulation is another stress system that we need to optimize for performance. And it's seemingly so obvious, but when it takes someone like yourself to share that, I think for us to stop and think, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Chris, I've heard you reference that as much as we'd think that the core body temperature sensor is a temperature device, it's actually an energy transfer device. Without, going too far into the physiology, but out of interest, can you just explain this energy transfer concept? I know Olav Alexander-Boo, who's a big proponent of your technology, who featured on an expert edition late 2021, which is now the most downloaded episode ever on this show. He spoke about this, and I think myself included and many others listened back several times before we even grasped the concept. So can you help expand on this energy transfer concept, Chris?
Yeah, and Olav's a great guy. I just got back with him and Christian and Gustav in Sierra Nevada. We do a lot of testing with them. So they're a great resource. They're pioneering. And it's a really privilege to be able to work with those guys. So basics, let's talk about temperature. Everyone knows what temperature is, right? I'm going to just go along a little experiment. So everyone, if I say, 15 degrees or 30 degrees, you know what I mean, right?
Yep.
We all understand temperature. So I want you to do a little experiment. So I can see your video, Brad, but I can't see everyone else. Just hold out your hand and I want you to tell me what's the room temperature. We all know what temperature is. Now just tell me what the room temperature is. Is it 19.5 degrees or 21.2 degrees?
21.2 degrees.
You sure? Do you know?
No, I don't. I don't.
Yeah. We all think in temperature, but when I ask you to tell you what it is, you don't know. So now I want you to do another experiment. I want you to grab two different devices, like two different stationary objects, like a metal leg on your chair, and then like a piece of wood or a desktop. They need to be two different types of material, preferably one's metal. Okay. Yeah. I see you got some cards there and a piece of metal. Which one's warmer and which one's colder?
So the postcards in my left hand feel warmer than the cold computer screen on the ground next to me.
Yeah. Perfect description. You said the computer screen unpowered computer screen feels colder. And the feel is correct words because they're both exactly the same temperature. Why? They're sitting around absorbing the same amount of energy. They're both the same temperature. But what happens is, for my example, I had a piece of metal. I grabbed a piece of metal and it pulls more energy out of me. Where if I grabbed a piece of wood or the cardboard that you had, it pulls less energy out of you. Actually, we think in temperature, but what we feel is that energy transfer. And so we are all conditioned to think in temperature, but our body senses energy transfer. And in our company, we actually make this energy transfer sensor. It measures in watts per meter squared. And we measure exactly what you feel. And then how our sensor works is if you can figure out the energy transfer, you can figure out the energy source when that's your core body temperature. And that's an oversimplification, but that's basically that. So it's basically this energy transfer, and that's what you feel. So we all think in temperature, but it's energy transfer that's the important part.
Yeah, wow.
Now, when we talk about energy, I want to talk about how much energy we're producing when we do an effort.
Well, let's go there. Can you, I heard you, Chris, describe, I think it was the Swiss Alps, and even though you're still hot, presumably from the ascent, the climb up where you're producing a lot of watts and energy, and outputting a lot of energy, you still can feel very cold, even though your core temperature is still remaining quite high because there's such a great amount of energy being lost. So that's an example, a practical example in sporting world of that energy transfer. Is that correct? You sense a lot, so you feel
that's
quite
correct. Hot. So again, our bodies, what we perceive of being hot and cold often doesn't match what's actually going on. So that biofeedback is quite important. The same thing, we can be operating at an elevated temperature and we don't feel too hot. It's because our temperature is stabilized. But if we get a sudden change, someone who goes into a Finnish sauna for the first time, they go in and it feels unbearable after just a few minutes. And then you see the people are used to it and they just sit in there for how do you sit there that long? So even though they're not hot, it's this perception I'm getting hot. So our bodies feel this energy transfer coming in. And so our brains take in that if I go into this Finnish sauna, I'm going to get too hot. So your defense mechanism starts that you need to get out of that situation until your body adapts. And then you can understand how that energy is being absorbed and how it can be managed properly. And the example I gave earlier was like riding down a hill. I've been riding down the Swiss Alps and I've sweated on the way up. And then the descent, I felt really cold. I had my device on, and in ePills, we were verifying, I verify the device all the time. And I felt like shaking. I felt really cold. And I was looking at the data and I said, well, these things don't work. But I wasn't even cold yet. I mean, I was just above normal temperature still, but my body perceived I was losing so much energy so quick that if I perceived it this way, my core temperature is going to go low. So the brain, the computer in my brain is quite good, and it starts that mechanisms early to prevent getting into a hypothermic state or getting into a dangerous state. So those mechanisms start early. So again, our perception, just like hold your hand out, in the room, our perception of temperature and what's really happening don't always match. So what we feel, it's kind of a hard thing. So this is where the biofeedback and having a device and being able to see it on your bike computer or on your smartwatch, seeing what your core temperature is, really helps you understand what's going on and be able to make smart decisions during your training and racing.
Which can ultimately optimize performance.
Exactly.
Enhance the conversation. Chris, you mentioned you're going to outline a little bit about when we do work, just how much heat's produced. This boggled my mind as I prepared for this. So can you take us through that?
Yeah, well, so first there's always an efficiency. So, running, you become more efficient, and cycling, you're efficient, you become more efficient. So let's say you have an efficiency rate of 33%, which is actually way too high. So someone producing 300 watts to make, so you're measuring that on your bike, on your power meter, and you see 300 watts. Your body needs 1,000 watts to make that 300 watts. That 700 watts is waste energy and comes out pretty much in heat energy. So 700 watts, so 1,000 watts total calories needed to make 300 mechanical watts. And that 700 watts comes out primarily in heat energy. So if you ever touch an erg after you get off an indoor session and the thing's screaming hot, your body did 3 times more than that. And if you look at the real numbers, they say about 20% efficiency rate, which is more realistic on, again, making 300 watts is 1,500 watts, which is 1,200 watts. I've got a small microwave in my flat, and it doesn't even put out that much power.
Well, I remember reading a quirky stat. Now, I haven't verified its accuracy, Chris, but the human cyclist, there's only one thing on Earth that generates more heat, and that's the hummingbird. So there you go. I'm not sure if that's verified or not. The human.
I'm not sure, but I wouldn't doubt it. Yeah, we produce most that we look at our power meter, but most that energy is coming out in heat energy. And again, the body to get rid of that heat energy needs to divert blood flow, which is diverting from the working muscles. So if you can keep your core temperature lower, there's more blood going to the muscles than there is going to the skin. You can produce more power, more efficiency with less calories, or you can optimize that system better. You're gonna be more efficient, or you can optimize that system by periodically training.
Yeah, and we're going to explore that obviously, but more available blood flow for the working musculature because the heat systems are more efficient.
Well, just think your fueling system and your cooling system is connected. So X steals from Y when you divert from one from the other to the other. But you can optimize that system. As Olav, he's the one who coined the phrase, he calls it vascular coordination. So if you can train at an elevated temperature, your body optimizes the blood flow to the working muscles and to the skin. So your body can learn to adapt to optimize those systems.
It sounds like a very Olav Alexander Boo little label, doesn't it? Vascular coordination. Yeah. And I cannot say it with the same accent. Thank you. You've given us some great basics there on the physiology and temperature regulation, power production with activity. I guess we could explore the trainability of it. So, you mentioned there that we generally race at high temperatures, but train in lower temperatures. And therefore it makes sense to train in the heat stress zone to try and improve the vascular coordination, if you like. Can you outline some examples of how that can be done? I know you've done a lot of work as a company in this space.
Well, the first is quite a few people or teams or high-level coaches know about heat acclimatization. So that means, last year going to Tokyo, a lot of teams did heat acclimatization protocols to get ready to go compete in the higher conditions. And heat acclimatization and heat training are very related, are very similar. So basically, to go to Tokyo, what most people do, and there's good literature on how to do this, is you train at an elevated core temperature for a couple of weeks. So you're training at a high temperature on purpose. 2 things happen when that happens. One is your body does this vascular coordination, it optimizes blood flow to the skin and to the working muscles. So it just gets that coordination happening better so you can still have the good flow to the muscles. And the second, your body produces more plasma. So because you need to sweat basically more. And there's a really cool side effect, which is a good performance gain. And as your body creates more plasma, and people, you can weigh yourself and you can actually see this happen. You get a plasma to hemoglobin imbalance. And so your body, to compensate, produces more hemoglobin, which is a performance gain. So there's good side effects for doing this heat adaptation training. And people who do, and I'll just call it heat training for now, because there's a slight difference between, I like to differentiate heat adaptation and just the heat training. So when you do heat adaptation training, you get the coordination and you get the increased hemoglobin. And that's shown to be even performance gains in cooler conditions. So even in a cooler event or a standard temperature event, there's performance gains. Kevin Poulton, down the road from you, he was Maddie Heyman's coach when Maddie won the Paris-Roubaix. And I don't know if you remember the iconic phase when Maddie won. He said, I did all this training on the erg. And Kevin now believes a lot of that had to do with the heat training, also the heat aspect of that. So I know he's got information. He believes a lot in heat training, and he's seen performance gains even in cooler conditions. And there's some research to back this up also, where people are getting performance gains even in cooler conditions. And that's this basically the added plasma and the hemoglobin. And even when you're doing cooler events, we have got data from the Giro last year, and there was this stage, it was 4 degrees and raining going up the mountains, and the guys were still at 39.5 degrees at the top. So it's freezing conditions, but their core temperatures were high, and we could actually see on average about 11% drop in power from the bottom of the climb to the top of the climb. So as your core temperature goes up, your performance goes down, and your core temperature goes up. This is quite important. Your core temperature goes up more of a function of effort than it does environmental conditions. So if you're doing big efforts, your core temperature is going to go up. And if it's cooler out, basically you can just get rid of that heat easier. But your temperature is still going to go up to a certain point. But generally in cooler conditions, your power numbers are just higher. It can be higher.
And the example to support that teaching there, Chris, is, as you just said, in the gyro, a drop of, say, what was it, 11 watts or 11%, but an increase in
11%.
Increase in body temperature, drop of 11% in power production, yet the environment, the ambient temperature is 4 degrees. It's freezing.
This one guy is one of the GC guys, 1.3 degrees temperature increase and 11% power drop.
Okay.
And that's someone who's trained, and he's more efficient than someone who hasn't prepared for those conditions.
And what might have their numbers look like as an example to compare with, Chris?
You mean someone who hasn't been heat trained or heat prepared?
Yeah. So
15 to 20% easy.
And what, 1 point greater than 1?
They wouldn't be a GC person.
Yeah. So there's a difference. Look at the GC classification. Some of the teams that core body temperature sensors are used in the pro peloton. Are you at liberty to share the uptake of the teams?
Sure. Some I can name officially. I think officially we're working with, I think the number now is 14, 15. Unofficially, there's quite a few teams that we do work with that I can't say who they are, but just a few. We were able to announce Lotto today, Trek. Yeah, I can say Trek, Quick Step, Inuus, just keep going down the line. We're doing Kenyan Tram. We were doing a lot with the women's teams, which is great. Sierra Tizit, Bora, quite a few, and there's a few that I haven't mentioned. So we're working with a lot of teams and also with a lot of top-level triathletes also.
You're listening to Chris Bloomfield-Brown, Performance and Technology Lead over at Core Body Temperature, discussing thermoregulation in sports. Support for today's show comes from Polar, the world's top choice in personal guidance for fitness, sports and health. Polar are extremely excited to announce that they have just launched 2 stunning new generation running watches, the Polar Pacer and the Polar Pacer Pro. These new running watches will give both the first-time runner and the serious runner the tools and the insights to track their performance and inform their training. Both watches offer an incomparable running experience with powerful training and recovery features that help runners understand their body and know when they're doing too much or not enough to reach their goals. Engineered specifically for running, the Polar Pacer and Polar Pacer Pro are equipped with a variety of functions unique to Polar and provide personalised guidance and support across the entire runner's journey, from the first steps to the marathon and beyond. The Polar Pacer Pro is for those who want to run better. It's one of the most powerful and sophisticated running watches ever built. It's ultralight with a high-performance core processor and includes an extensive suite of advanced training tools that will help serious runners improve their running economy and performance. With built-in navigation and running power, it's debuting at an incredible $499. And the Polar Pacer is for those who want to fall in love with running. It's an ideal running watch for those who are starting their journey as runners. It embodies the simplicity of running with all the essentials, plus the specialised training, sleep and recovery tools that they will need to fall in love with the sport. The Polar Pacer will help all runners get started at just $299. So if you feel like it's time to beat your best, then jump across and shop Polar at polar.com. And support for today's show comes from Earshots. Lock on, train on, and rock on with Earshots Bluetooth headphones. Earshots have you covered for staying motivated while you train. Earshots magnetic ear clip means you can push your limits without being distracted by annoying cords or earbuds that fall out. Use the code PERFORMANCE, one word, all capitals, at earshots.com for 10% off your purchase. These are cracking earphones, the earphones that I personally use when I train, and I cannot recommend them highly enough. So jump over to earshots.com. For now, let's jump back with this week's learn-ins with our expert edition guest, Chris Blumfield-Brown, core body temperature performance and technology lead, discussing thermoregulation in sports. Integrating this into training, what are some practical ways to go about it?
So basically, maybe I'll just explain heat training. Heat training is basically just putting your body in heat stress, just enough heat stress so you get that adaptation. The magic number is generally around 38.5 degrees, but that number can be very individual. So you just need to be at what we call like thermal load. So train around 38.5 degrees for roughly 45 minutes to an hour. Coaches all have their slightly different opinions. And when you're doing if you're doing a heat block, you do that for 2 weeks. You basically get your elevated temperature for 45 minutes to an hour every day for 2 weeks. Or some people just will incorporate it into their normal training, and that adaptation just takes a little bit longer. So, and what that does is that builds up the plasma and helps that coordination. So if you can do it as a heat block, or you can just add this in. Once you've done a heat block or once you've done adaptation, you need to do enough thermal load. And then again, that's 2 to 3 sessions per week, 45 minutes to an hour of elevated temperature training again. So, and because what happens is your body produces excess plasma and your body doesn't want to circulate this. So if it doesn't need it anymore, you'll just pee it out. So you just need to keep enough heat stress to be able to keep all of those physical adaptation properties that you want to keep.
To stop that disadaptation.
Yep. So just to keep that happening, you just need to do that. Now, to do it, it's not that hard usually. So say you're doing an easy tempo day, you can just wear extra clothes. If you're doing a long climb, wear extra clothes and just get at that elevated temperature and just ride up the hill. Or if you're doing high intensity workout, maybe you've been at that temperature range for half hour towards the end of the workout. So all you do is prolong your workout a little bit longer. If you're on the indoor trainer, turn off the fan, put some extra clothes on. And if you're outside, put extra clothes on or just do a harder effort. Again, your temperature, how you get the temperature doesn't seem to be that important. And you can either turn off convection, turn off the fans if you're on the indoor trainer and wear extra clothes. You can heat the room. You can do higher efforts. So you're producing energy and you elevate that temperature. Now, a super important part, and this is why using the device is important. A lot of times athletes like to try to push things higher. So this magic number is generally around 38.5 degrees. So someone might think, well, if I go to 39.5 degrees, I'm even doing better. That's incorrect. That's too much stress. So really, you only have to be around this number. You're sweating a lot and you just get up to that. And it's just enough stress. Too much thermal stress can be really bad. We saw this at a few people who were preparing for Tokyo. They just did a little too much and your performance goes down. Your body, you feel sluggish, or you can get yourself in serious trouble. And so it's really important. More is not better. More can be detrimental. So you have to be very careful on doing this. Heat illnesses can take, there's cases where people said that heat illnesses take up to 9 months to recover from. These are people who have like collapsed during triathlons and stuff. They can take a long time to recover. Your body, it's dangerous when your body gets really hot, and your body does a lot of things to make sure you don't get in that situation again.
Gosh, multi-Olympic triathlon medalist Johnny Brownlee, British athlete, obviously, shared about his Cozumel heat illness quite vividly on a prior featured performer episode, Chris, and yeah, he mirrored what you just said. It took months and months for him to feel back to I guess his normal best. So it's a great point you make. It's not something to mess around with. But the magic number 38.5, is that just through observation data?
So basically, when we worked with a lot of researchers and coaches, and one of the things it's really clear is like heart rate is very individual, right? Some people have a higher heart rate, some people have a lower heart rate, and they can still both perform, but it is individual. Thermoregulation is even more so. So some people can operate at higher temperatures, and some people operate at a lower temperature. So to find that magic number, we worked with quite a few researchers and coaches, and we developed this test. We call it a heat ramp test. And it's basically a reverse cardio drift test. And basically what we do is you warm up. Actually, Kevin designed the warm-up phase, Kevin Poulton. And you warm up to about 38 degrees. And you look at your heart rate is, and just look at your power is. Then you stop looking at your power. And you just keep going along, and you ride a constant heart rate. As your temperature climbs up, to keep that same heart rate, you have to keep dropping your power, and you try to keep the same cadence. You can do it running or cycling. It works exactly the same. After a certain point, when your power drops about 20%, we say that's enough. And so generally in about 45 minutes, most people will drop around 20% power, and your temperature generally goes up, depending on the person, between 1.2 and 1.7 degrees or so. And that helps us. We've got it's all defined on our website, or all outlined on our website, and that helps us figure out that range. Some people are closer to 39 degrees, their magic number, and some people are barely 38 degrees, so 38.2 or so. So that number can change. So we try to develop this test to give people a guideline to about where that is. So generally, it's an area where you're sweating a lot, but you're not in a high thermal stress area. So, and it just has to be in that range where you're training. So it's quite easy usually to obtain. It generally feels pretty warm. It depends how used to it you are. It's easy, and it helps people dial in what their magic number is.
And how often, Chris, might an athlete need to do these heat ramp tests? Because I imagine it might change as an athlete does experience it. Cumulative heat stress over time and adapts, the vascular coordination improves.
Yeah, with the adaptation, generally people watch their peak numbers will start dropping, or they can actually sometimes achieve a higher number. But usually most people's temperatures start dropping. And usually after an adaptation process, you just kind of fit it in. It's not really physically demanding on your muscles. Depending on how you want to get the temperature in. So you can even do one on a tempo day, or you could do it at the end of a tempo day even. So it's a quite easy test to do, and you can even incorporate into a normal training, and that just gives you a rough idea. The first time some people do this test and they're getting hot, they just stop early, because if you're feeling uncomfortable and unwell, that's one of the signals. It's just like, it's not worth, you do not thermal stress your body. There is no benefits to doing that quite like that. So we'd say that to be safe, just if you're feeling really unwell or feeling really uncomfortable, just stop. Because if you keep doing some things like this, your body's going to adapt, and then we will feel comfortable. So we've had people who've done it the first time, and they just said this was, unbearable. And then after a few sessions, they say, "Oh, I don't know what I was complaining about." So,
wow. The
adaptation when you do heat training too. I've had countless people say after roughly around 3 training sessions, they say, because when you do heat training, you generally look heart rate and temperature. Don't watch power. Don't try to ride to power. But what they notice is their power numbers just keep coming up. Usually even after as little as 3 or 4 training sessions. You say, well, my power numbers are already up.
Wow, it's a sensitive system, isn't it? And Chris, you outlined the difference between heat acclimation, doing this to prepare for an event. You referenced the Tokyo Olympic Games, obviously in the extremely hot conditions, versus heat training. How often would someone perhaps do a heat block in heat training? Like the 2 weeks, every day, 45 minutes around the magic number. Is this once a year, twice a year? Depends.
Yeah, it's generally kind of early in the season. If you can get that plasma built up, there's some really good, I think it's actually Olav's, the Norwegian site, where they've shown that if you can get that plasma built up quickly, you feel like you've got your conditioning back. So if you can get those plasma levels built up early in the season and then just do enough heat training throughout the season to maintain them. And then some people, if they don't want to disrupt their plan, you just incorporate heat training in and the adaptation just takes a little bit longer.
Yeah, okay. And so you add it in just through exposure to, as you say, 2 or 3 sessions a week, which I imagine, Chris, for the recreationally competitive and beyond athlete who are doing interval work or high intensity interval training, they're going to be experiencing elevated temperatures for quite a period of time in their normal training cycle anyway.
Yeah, well, if you're doing high intensity training, a lot of times it's the heat thermal load's important. It's duration in that time to get the proper adaptation.
Duration.
So if you're doing high intensity intervals, sometimes it's your temperature is going up and down, or it's up only at the end of the intervals. So you don't have enough duration in that time zone. So that's why it's good to monitor just to make sure. And that's what some of the teams we're working with, once they've done the adaptation, one of the things they're monitoring from the athletes is just, are they getting enough thermal load, continuous thermal load to maintain those plasma levels?
Stephen Seiler, who just shared about extensification of our sessions, would be very happy to hear that about extending the duration, which leads to the question, 45 minutes, we've spoken about finding the magic number, if you like, and the heat ramp test to assist with that. But 45 minutes, where does that number come from, Chris? Could it be 60 minutes for some athletes and less?
Yeah, and we actually have one person, and again, it's going to be an individual number, and it's a little bit hard to do, and that's why a lot of the coaches, people like yourself, try to help define that number a little bit better. So we try to give guidelines, and then there's better people like yourself or other coaches that help kind of refine that. And we actually have one researcher who's trying to figure out the minimum amount of thermal load that you need to maintain those, because he's just trying to figure out the minimum. But again, the general practice is roughly 2 to 3 sessions a week, which is 2.5 if you want. Maybe 1 week is 3, another week is 2, just enough to kind of maintain those levels. And again, thermal load is roughly around your heat training zone. So say your magic number is 38.5 or 38.4, you're plus or minus 0.2 for 45 minutes. It's not a strict hard cutoff, but it's just approximately to keep those adaptation process happening.
Where do you see this technology, this monitoring technology, if you like, going in the future with high performance? Chris, you mentioned prior to us recording that there's integrative efforts from pioneers in sports science to look at coordinating different things. But where does this go? I heard you reference that as our body temperature goes up, our glucose absorption rate goes down. So there's obviously that strong coordination with the...
Yeah, there's a lot of, there's been a lot of work in heat areas, but there's not been, as we said before, the only way to monitor your core temperature during sports, was either a rectal probe or taking e-pills, electronic pill with a little thermometer in them. And obviously, that's what we do a lot for our validation and increasing accuracy. It's not a static. We're continuously working on that. So I think we're one of the biggest consumers of e-pills in Europe. At roughly 70 euros, probably close to 90 Australian per pill. And we take them like vitamins.
That's an expensive training session.
Yeah, and they're generally only one-time use.
You wouldn't think you'd be polishing them off. of.
Yeah, and if you take those and you get injured, you can't do MRIs and other things. So it's quite our device is much more convenient, and to be able to gather that data all the time. So there's lots of implications. Like there's some research with glucose absorption rate changes. So there how to optimize that. There's racing strategies around cooling, and we talk about that. We haven't really talked about competition yet. We have some people in recovery. One of the really good things for our sensors also is in the 24-hour monitoring, your circadian rhythm. So, I mean, that's generally one of the questions we also go, so what's your normal body temperature? And most people would say, 36.5 or 37. And the answer is, well, it changes all the time. It's not static. It goes up a little bit during the day and down. But when you sleep, generally your temperature drops about 0.5, 0.6 degrees. And as you sleep, your temperature is lower, and then you wake up, it comes back up. And that's called your circadian rhythm. And you can actually see, I can see in my data almost the minute I fall asleep, as my temperature just starts to plummet. And I can see the sleep quality that I'm getting exactly. I can see exactly if I get up in the middle of the night and the difference in there. So you can actually see fatigue, and you can see some other strains. So we're working with people who are looking more closely at that circadian rhythm and analysis that way. And we have people even adjusting their circadian rhythm after your circadian rhythm can be tied to performance. So they adjust their circadian cycle to correspond to the start time for the events. There's a lot of, it's great. We work with a lot of talented and smart people and intuitive people. And so collecting all this information and and supporting their projects, we just see an expansion of knowledge here.
The Norwegian triathlon sports director, Arild Veiten, shared that core body temperature sensors were so critical in the development of the Trimtech suit, which Christian Blumenfeld, from the unaware, who were critical of the look of the white triathlon suit there in Tokyo, was worn to victory. And on that, Olav, shared, and Arild as well on prior episodes around the development of the technology, working alongside yourself and the team there at Core. So I guess that's a good example. You mentioned racing strategies, Chris. We must go there.
Yep.
From pre-cooling for a 4-minute pursuit, track pursuit, through to cooling down before a big climb on a bike race. Can you share a little bit about some of the practical applications you're working with?
One of the questions I get is so why should I monitor my core body temperature? And the first answer for an athlete, a lot of the things we've been talking about is coaching and prescribing this for the athletes. So for an athlete's point of view, the first thing that you should be is become aware, really becoming aware of your temperature and how that is affecting your performance. People just start noticing things, or they look down and they didn't realize they were so hot. And when they're doing those intervals, when their temperature goes up, if you think about it, so say you're doing interval training, right? Those last intervals, your temperature's going up. One of the reasons those last intervals are so hard sometimes is because your temperature is higher. So seeing that correlation of your temperature going up and how that's affecting your performance, that's one of the first big awarenesses. And then what people are doing with that information is they can see that they know if their temperature is going up, or before your temperature goes up, it's easier to keep your temperature lower than it is to get hot and try to pull that temperature out. So it's sort of like dehydration. It's easier to drink all the time and try to keep hydrated. Once you get dehydrated, it takes longer to recover. So it's easier to prevent. And so the first part is awareness and how it affects you. So we had some of Olympic athletes that were adjusting their pace based on core temperature.
Yeah, too. We're trying to avoid that core temperature elevating because, as you say, it takes a lot longer for that core temperature to come down than it does for it to be avoided, that jump, by manipulating effort, I guess.
Right. And some of the teams were doing strategic cooling. So they were figuring out how to cool the guys down so to try to keep the lower temperatures. One Olympic organization, I'm not sure I can name them. It was really good because normally what happens is as your core temperature goes up, you need to adjust your pace. You need to slow down, basically. And the Olympic organization said, yes, that's correct, but that's not how you win gold medals, which I thought was good. So the things you can do about it is, one is being aware, trying to cool off before you get there. And that's just keeping that evaporation process. You can see during Tokyo, a lot of people just pouring water on your head. So trying to cool yourself before you get hot. If you, in a triathlon, knowing we have people in the transitions that actually temperature seems to rise a lot in the transition time. So being aware of that and doing certain things around those areas, they have some strategies built in there. And then during the event, trying to cool off. We have people on bikes now looking at not only just aero position, but aero versus cooling, as you saw with the Norwegians. And there's some ingenious products coming out soon that are also involved in cooling, especially in the bikes and things like that. And also, if you're racing, like road racing, if you're coming up to a hill, so what we try to do is, if you're aware of your temperature, you can see that you're warmer or something and you have a climb coming up in 10K, or try to cool before that period. And because when you do the climb, your temperature is going to rise. And so if you can do a little bit to cool off beforehand, splashing water on your body for that evaporation process, getting a little bit more air for the air circulation for convection cooling. And then when you get to the climb, your temperature is going to go up. So if you can start a climb at 38 degrees and your competitor starts at 38.5, you're going to have an advantage at the top. Your performance will drop less than his will, most likely. So it's just being aware of that. And a good one that people don't think about, and this is again because of our perception of how we think of things, or what we feel versus what's happening. Say you descend the other side of the hill. Your body has all this sweat and it's evaporating, and your body's now saying, oh, I'm cooling off quick so I don't feel hot. But your body's still hot when you get to the bottom of the climb. So, all that sweat's evaporated away. So that's actually the time to wet yourself again. Spread your water on your body to get that evaporation process continuing happening to try to keep dropping your temperature. And that's one where our perception is different from the reality, and where you can still be proactive to try to decrease your temperature to have the advantage there.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, but that's the hand on the cardboard versus the cold computer screen, right?
Exactly.
If anyone isn't convinced that this is helpful, I think you'll just convince them. That's excellent. Looping back to something that was curious that you mentioned, that with adaptation, typically people's core body temperature does drop, and having all those, or doesn't raise as high, I guess, having all those flow-on performance benefits. But you mentioned that a few people, probably the outliers, the temperature can actually rise. What's the mechanism there, and what's the benefit?
Well, I'm not sure how far I want to go there. There seems to be a little bit of advantage that some people can have a higher core temperature. It's not really conclusive at this time, because it's a function of core temperature versus skin temperature versus environmental temperature. It's a thermal path or a thermal model. And so if you have a high core temperature and a lower skin temperature, you can dissipate more heat quicker. So there's some people that are experimenting or be able to do that because if you can get rid of more heat quicker and still operate at those higher temperatures, there seems to possibly be a performance benefit. It's not 100% conclusive, so nothing I'm going to prescribe or talk conclusively about. So, but we have some people experimenting, and maybe we'll have some more information later this summer on that. So, and incidentally, a lot of women, anecdotal, seem to be able to operate at a higher temperature.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there are sex differences with this thermoregulator. Yeah,
well, and in women, there's another advantage of 24-hour monitoring. We're working with a lot of the women's teams, and it's an exciting year in women's cycling this year. It's just, I think it's a groundbreaking year in women's cycling this year with their own Roubaix and the Tour de France, their own Tour de France this year. It's great to see all the growth there. But we have some women that are doing 24-hour monitoring, and because with 24-hour monitoring, we can predict their fertility cycles and the coaches are interested in how that's affecting their performance and be able to manage that a little bit better. And as women's temperatures can vary a little bit more, some women seem to be able to operate at a higher temperature with smaller effects. So one girl, she operates continually around 40.5 degrees, and she doesn't even have much of a performance degradation there. So why? I'm not 100% sure, but stay tuned.
Yeah, gosh, fascinating. Chris, aero versus cooling, just briefly, you said, there's experiments being done there. Is that just as it sounds, the trade-off of being aero, tucked in tight, maybe not exposed to as much evaporation, convection of the generated heat. Is that what you're referencing there?
Yeah, exactly. So there's two things there. You mentioned on pre-cooling, but then once you're doing an event, if you're just doing a prologue and it's 15 minutes, it doesn't matter as much, aside from pre-cooling. But if you're doing an hour, a 45-minute or an hour time trial, your performance at the end can really drop down. And if you're doing a triathlon or a half Ironman, your performance can significantly drop. So not only do we need to be thinking about the aero position, but we should be thinking about the cooling. And we have people and bike fitters, clothing manufacturers and helmet designers that are thinking about these two things because they know there's a high correlation. Sometimes sacrificing a little bit of aero you can have a performance gain at the end. Or we have clothing manufacturers like the Norwegians were looking at different ways to try to cooling during those longer events, especially those longer events.
Yeah, wow. So I guess my Ironman triathlon debut in Cairns, Australia, in the hot conditions last year didn't go so well, and I can blame it on the fact that I wore an enclosed gyro helmet, right, without any air vents. And I did wonder, I'm like, would it be better just to get rid of the aero advantage here and just keep my head cool because it's going to be hot? And I
would say it would be worth looking at. Yeah. So and it doesn't, and you can still have things that are very aero, but still have enough cooling capabilities going on. Yeah. So there are some very innovative companies that are very seriously looking at this. So clothing companies and the helmet companies. So right down to the shoes, there's companies even looking down at the shoe level. And yeah.
Wow. I do recall an aero helmet. I think the brand doesn't matter. And I certainly wasn't demonizing gyro helmets. Obviously, they're an industry leader, but where you can pull up the thing and put a bit of, open a little flap and squirt water in there and close it back up to keep the aero. So I guess that's an example, a practical one.
And a lot of times it's small things that make a big difference in it at high level. So, and you touched on pre-cooling. Yes. And that's also triathlon, even in triathlons, it's a little bit, but especially other events where pre-cooling, a lot of the track cycling teams do a lot of pre-cooling. And that's events, like we said, only last a couple of minutes because they found performance gains when they warm up. They're trying to get the vascular dilation in the muscles so they can get the blood flow and the neural coordination and everything happening. So everything's all activated, ready to go for these events, but keep the core temperature low so they can still have maximum blood flow to the muscles. And so they're pre-cooling for an event that only with ice slushy machines and ice vests for an event that can last 17 seconds or just a couple of minutes. So they found in even short events that can make a significant performance gain. So if you think about it in an Ironman, if they're thinking of that in 2 minutes, now we're talking hours.
Yeah, wow, it's fascinating. I recall seeing Alistair Brownlee, dual triathlon Olympic champion, before the debut of the Super League Triathlon Series in Hamilton Island, blistering, incredibly hot, sitting in a big garbage can full of ice and cold water, and not going outside to go to the marshalling of the event until he was the last athlete to leave. He sat in there in that room, would not go out until he absolutely had to. And I guess he's a consummate professional and thinking about those things. This is years ago.
Yeah, and that's the top level. It's all the details. But again, I want to say that this is applicable for even the person who's doing your first Ironman. There's also a half Ironman or a marathon or you're racing your bike or just training on your bike. The first thing is to be aware of your body. There's in Australia, especially when it's hot, there's also a safety aspect. So you can see when you're getting hot and again, regulate before you get too hot. So there's a safety side of it. And there's awareness side, safety side of it, and then there's a training aspect. And the training aspect, again, is quite simple. We race at a high temperature, and occasionally we need to train at a high temperature to get the adaptation. So when we race, we have that system, that thermal regulation system optimized.
Yeah, well, awareness, safety, and training. The devices themselves, Chris, they're they're only small. They strap onto the side of a heart rate monitor strap, and now the data can be continuously monitored in the cloud, right? There's a mobile phone.
Yeah, no, and it even works. It works on your Garmin, your Wahoo devices, Coros watches. There's a few more I've got sitting on my desk. I'm not allowed to show them yet, but it's getting adopted on more and more devices. You can look at your data and today's plan and training peaks, Garmin Connect, intervals.icu, more and more are coming also. So Core Temp is a new Ant Plus standard. So it's like a power meter, a heart rate monitor. It's just another device category. And it's a new core temperature is a new fit file standard. So the fit files that are all our devices, Garmin and Wahoo and Coros devices, they all record in that. So it's a standard that can be applied there. Yeah, it's quite simple. We're trying to make more and more integrations. We have more and more in development with our partners. And we'll be announcing soon. So, and if there's one that we're missing, just let us know and we'll go bug them.
Yeah, and you mentioned before we started recording, Chris, that the acceptance of the core temperature body sensors, the acceptance rate is really astounded many in the professional cycling peloton. You said power meters took years to be fully adopted and accepted, yet this has kind of been almost unanimously accepted now as key data.
Yeah, and a lot of the top level athletes and teams know the value of this big data. And it's not the most important, it's just another important piece in the whole puzzle. So, you still need your power meter, you still want your heart rate monitor, you still need your cadence sensor. And this core temperature is just adding another dimension for better understanding for the big global picture, trends over time. And it's not rocket science, your temperature goes up, your performance goes down. How does that how does that relate? And how can I adjust it? How can I optimize it? So it's easy to use. It's pretty easy to understand. Yeah. And there's a lot of value. So in training and pretty much anyone can apply that information. So
yeah, and what you can manage, you can measure, as sports scientist Dr. Dan Plews shared recently. And just lastly there, Chris, the CEO of the company, Dr. Wolf Glatz, I believe the catalyst story was following the collapse of dual Olympic triathlete, American triathlete Sarah True in, I think it was in Frankfurt in the Ironman. Is that correct? I haven't heard the full story.
Yeah, I mean, this project has been going on for a while. So this sensor that that the parent company makes, the sensor technology that we make in Switzerland, it's used in other industries. It's used primarily in the laser industry. It's up on the International Space Station. They use sensors up there. It's used in some building and some other areas. So it's a very high-tech sensor. And to monitor core body temperature, the application, the project's been going on over 7 years with clinical studies and prototypes and things. And then for the acceptance, Wolf was watching this, and he saw them collapse and said, there's a great application for monitoring core body temperature. And we had been involved in some laser projects, and I came in and told him about some of the sports world because I've been involved in that most of my life. With biometrics, and race car drivers and other areas. And so when he got that, he called me up and said, you want to come and help us turn this into a real product? So, nice. And then COVID hit. And so we had this long project, and then we decided to turn on the gas. Instead of 18 months, we did it pretty much in 3.5 months. So that was a busy couple months.
Wow. And here you are, core body temperature sensors. Chris, you've shared so well. Thank you. Every guest of the show gets issued 2 set questions. And the first is this: if you could boil everything you've learned and continue to learn into one single piece of advice to help listeners of this show perform at their physical best, what would that single piece of advice be? And this can be centric around the discussion that we're having today.
The first thing that I think most people is probably going to be awareness. Be aware of your temperature, because there's such performance implications there. And it's something that a lot of us haven't been there. And as soon as you have that awareness, it just opens up this intellectual curiosity or this better knowledge base. So I think the advice is be aware of your temperature, and the best way to do that is to monitor it. So, or even if you're not monitoring, just thinking about it, I'm getting hot, and just being aware. Most people aren't aware of how hot they actually get, which is incredible. I mean, it's incredible how hot how hot athletes can get for prolonged periods of time.
So become aware. Chris, every guest of the show issues listeners with a physical challenge for the week. So what is Chris Blomfield Brown, physical challenge for the week going to be?
Well, I would say to do some heat training. But to do heat training, you need to monitor it. So it's hard. So you can either use a rectal probe or grab a core device and try heat training and see and watch it adaptation. It's amazing. I have so many people see that. So try heat training. I would actually say 2 weeks, but try it for at least a week and see if you're getting that adaptation. And then once you get this wear, and your awareness is going to grow.
Yeah, so choose the rectal probe or the core device. I think I know what I'll be choosing.
It's up to you. Both work great. The rectal probes work great.
Yeah, but, not everyone's cup of tea. But, Chris, is there any benefit to wearing these devices through a working day, for example, or primarily just ensuring that it's consistently worn with exercise?
I wear it all the time. We've got a new phone app that's about to be released in the next few weeks that's much better for 24-hour monitoring. But there's 24-hour monitoring. There's a lot of implications, and we're involved in some really exciting research that makes this even more interesting. All this data we're getting from sports people and all this information is actually going into other things where for general society. So we're involved in early detection of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, and prevention or early detection of sepsis, blood poisoning, which is really exciting. So not only do we think we can give you a performance gain in your sports performance, but in the long term, we might be able to do some really good add value in the benefit of society. So
what a great place to wrap up this expert edition conversation. What a noble mission, and it's exciting technology. I think endurance athletes by and large are quite accepting of innovative technologies, and I think this is a brilliant example and practical application. So Chris, thank you for sharing so generously.
Okay, thanks for allowing us to spread the message. And again, our biggest thing is trying to make people aware of this and build knowledge. So a pleasure to have the opportunity to share. And if anyone has any information or questions, we'll shoot them to you or shoot them to us at corebodytemp.com. And we're more than happy to help you with your projects and things like that.
So Core Body Temp on the socials, and it's best to go through Core Body Temp. Is there anywhere if people want to follow the output you put, or it's all through Core Body Temperature?
Everything corebodytemp.com, and then our Instagram and Twitter feeds and other places. So,
yeah, brilliant.
That's the easiest place to find us.
Absolutely. So. Chris, thank you once again. We appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Brad. It's been a pleasure.
So there you have it, another episode of the Physical Performance Show, and I trust and I know that you enjoyed Chris's sharings today. I found that a fascinating conversation with so many learnings, and I hope you did as well. Now you can find Core Body Temperature sensors over on Instagram at Core Body Temp. Do check out the technology. I think we'll see a lot more from this company in the years to come. Now there is no paid affiliation with Core Body Temperature. It was simply a topic that I felt we needed to address and share here on the Physical Performance Show. Keep those podsies coming. That's a screenshot of the episode that you're enjoying at any given moment, typically while you're training. Tag in the show at Physical Performance Show and we will reshare those on the socials. You'll also find the show now over on YouTube, where you can view videos of the guests sharing. Just search the Physical Performance Show. Now, a huge thanks to the show's patrons. If you'd like to support the production of the show from just $5 per month, you can do so over at physicalperformanceshow.com. Just click the Patreon tab and there you can pledge your support. In return, we'll grant you complimentary access to our entire back catalogue of live stream events, including our recent Dr. Stephen Seiler live stream event, Durability and High Intensity Repeatability in Endurance Sports. And a huge thank you to our new show patrons, Daniel Hopper and Chris Weeks. Thank you for your support. Massive thanks as always to the great folk who make this show possible each and every week. Daryl Misson, audio engineering, Susan Wilkin, show administration, Matthew Olding, show graphic design. And of course, a huge thank you to today's show partners, Polar. Do check out these wonderful 2 new watches that Polar have released, the Polar Pacer and the Polar Pacer Pro. And of course, thank you to Earshot's Bluetooth headphones. Now, coming up on the Physical Performance Show, you'll enjoy some more highs, lows, and learnings. We'll have the highs, lows, and learnings from professional Team Ineos cyclist Pavel Sivakov. But next week, we'll be exploring the topic of the treatment, diagnosis, and prevention of proximal hamstring tendinopathy. Now, many endurance runners, triathletes will have experienced this persisting pain in the backside, literally. And next week, we'll hear from PhD candidate Anthony Nasser, sports physiotherapist, around how to best get on top of this pesky condition. So until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.